Good evening. On behalf of the Islesboro Forum Committee, welcome to the 6th program of the 2021 Islesboro Forum Speaker Series. I'm Gail Jackson and the moderator of today's program. This is our 29th year of presenting distinguished speakers to the island community. We are doing this week's program on Zoom webinar only, but I want to emphasize that next week, our August 22nd program will be in person and via Zoom. So please plan to turn out in person next Sunday. More about that at the end of the program today. Please check out our website, islesboroforum.org, for our complete calendar and for recorded videos of the programs we have already presented this summer. Before I introduce our speaker, I also want to acknowledge and thank the 7 other committee members for their excellent support and ideas, and our technical producer, Michael Hutcherson. Their names are listed on our website. Please consider making a donation to the forum. Our costs for 7 programs will be about $1,500, not counting the volunteer hours donated by the committee. We hope you will want to make a donation to help cover those costs. A quick reminder as to our format: once our speaker has completed his remarks, we will have time for Q&A. As you think of questions, please type them into the Q&A function on the bottom right of the Zoom webinar screen. Hit the enter button and the moderator will restate your question for our speaker to answer. Now, it is my pleasure to ask longtime Islesboro resident and source of many outstanding forum speakers over the years by virtue of her impressive network of highly accomplished individuals, Betsy Cohen, to introduce tonight's speaker, David Greene, the president of Colby College in Waterville, Maine. I've had the pleasure of knowing David since roughly 1997, when he was in the early years of his career in the position of executive assistant to the president of Smith College, where I was then a trustee. He has ascended the rungs of academic administration steadily and impressively ever since then. But I'll let Betsy tell you more about that herself. And now over to Betsy Cohen for the introduction.
Thank you, Gail, and I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to my friend and a very distinguished educator, David Greene. He's right up the road, folks, so you really ought to go and visit with him. Colby is an extraordinary campus, and one which David, through his years at Colby, has put his mark on. His mark is outreach, understanding the needs of students, being proactive in terms of the way in which the campus operates, and making the experience of Colby College a very unique one. I think the message has gotten out because the number of students applying for admission today is double what it was even just 3 or 4 years ago. So you can tell that students are talking to students, and the educational experience is one which is very engaging. Prior to Colby, as Gail indicated, in addition to Smith, David was at Brown University, and where I met him at the University of Chicago with initiatives, leading initiatives in community interaction among other formats. And it's this kind of interaction which has broken the seal, so to speak, of Colby College and now integrated it once more with Waterville, Maine, where there is a tech center, students, and I understand even a good restaurant, but I'll have to test that out myself. David received a bachelor's degree in history from Hamilton College and a master's in human development and psychology from Harvard before earning a master's and doctoral in education and social policy at Harvard. His research interests include social and political movements and their influence on institutions and individuals. With that, I'd like to pass the microphone to David Greene to tell you about American education.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Gail. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I wish I were with you on Islesboro. It's just an absolutely beautiful day in Maine. So I am so grateful that you would actually show up on Zoom. To me, one of the great discoveries of COVID was Zoom, but also one of the banes of COVID was Zoom. And we've all been on it for too many times. So I really appreciate you joining today, especially on a day that's just absolutely gorgeous. What I thought I'd do today is give you a sense of what I see as some of the major trends that are taking place in higher education, some of which I think are really threatening to many colleges and universities. I'll talk a little bit about COVID-19 and what that did across higher education, talk a little bit about what happened at Colby as well, and how different colleges and universities responded to this pandemic. And then I want to talk a little bit about the future and where I see the needs of American higher education and where we need to go with all of this. So I'm hoping I will provoke you a little bit. I'll get you thinking about some things maybe differently. I will poke fun at some of our sister institutions in higher education, at least ones I have relationships with, as well as our own on this. And I hope that you'll be willing to ask some questions and engage in a conversation around these. To me, this is these topics are incredibly interesting, but also important to the nation as a whole. And it's an area in higher education that has long been one of the great strengths of the United States, but is really, I think, at an interesting turning point at this moment. So let me give you a sense first of some of the trends that I see that are happening. And I could name many more, but I'll just give you a handful quickly to give you a sense of some of the things that are affecting institutions across the country. The first thing I'll just say is there are major demographic shifts in this country, as we all know. You've probably seen the news just coming out from the new census this week about the change in the United States population and what that means in terms of the diversity of our country and how that's changing. It's also changing where people live right now. Huge shifts away in many cases from parts of the Northeast to parts of the Southeast to the Southwest to the West, away from the Midwest. Right now, we're seeing a significant drop in the number of students in high school overall. Americans are overall having fewer children at this time. To give you some numbers, if you look over the last 10 years or so, the number of students enrolled in American colleges dropped by 1 million students over that time. In fact, last year during COVID, it dropped another 3.5%. That's probably a temporary drop in part, but we'll see through all of this. But we're seeing a real kind of cliff that we're beginning to slide down right now, a demographics cliff in terms of the number of 18-year-olds in the country. It'll come back up a bit in another several years, but we're really seeing a major change. And I'll tell you, even at a place like Colby, where if you look back years ago, you would have seen a student body that was largely from the Northeast. And now when you look at the applications that come to Colby, California is the #2 state in terms of sending applications to Colby. Texas is usually the top 5, 6 in the country overall. There's been some major shifts in the American population, American demographics, and colleges and universities are feeling those in a variety of different ways. A second trend that I think is important to note is that for many institutions, the financial model is broken. at those institutions. Now, if you know something about the financing of higher education or education in general, it's that it's a money-losing industry. Educating students is expensive, especially when you're doing it at a high quality. And it's very hard to charge a fee that will equal the cost. Now, that's true for us. Even at the high cost that we charge students, it's not the full fee. We're grateful, as many other institutions are, to have other sources of income that supplement that, primarily for us from fundraising and endowment. Others have other sources of income for this, but it makes a huge difference on this. But one of the challenges has been over time in American higher education is that colleges and universities have basically charged the same amount, no matter the perceived quality, no matter the outcomes. So there's sort of one price for state universities, one price for private universities, and that's how things stayed for a long time. That's starting to shake out. And so you would see the same price for, can name a small university that does not have a national reputation, charge the same thing as Harvard over time. And now that's beginning to really shift out in a way that we're starting to see college and universities changing their funding model, their pricing model out of necessity. And it's creating a real hardship for a number of colleges. In fact, you're really starting to see a number of these colleges just find that they cannot survive. And I'll come back to that. Along with this has just been an over-reliance from some places. This is true of graduate programs, it's been true of some graduate and professional programs, and certainly true for some undergraduate programs, an incredible reliance on debt. And you see this with this booming debt in the country for students overall. That's not true at a place like Colby. Less than a quarter of our students take any debt when they graduate from Colby. We package all of our financial aid packages without any loans at all. We replace them with grants. So those who do choose to take it often take it because they're using it as a funding source or something else through all of that. But our students in general have minimal debt relative to other places. But when you look around the country, that is not the mode overall. A third trend is that the popular support for higher education has never been lower than it is right now. Higher education in general has always had extraordinary support in this country. You see it through public policy, for example, from the tax breaks for colleges and universities seen as providing a public good. All of these things are starting to fade. You see it right now in the way that states have pulled back on funding for their state universities. You see it in every poll. And there's really, some of it is about the politicization of higher education. So right now, if you look at a poll of support for higher education, Democrats are far more likely to support higher education than Republicans. In fact, Republicans would have very low support for higher education overall. But if you went back 25, 30 years ago, that would not be the case where you would see such disparity along the political spectrum in its relationship. And some of this, I will have to say, higher education has to own this, and happy to talk about any of those issues as we go through this. But colleges are often seen as being out of touch with their communities. They're seen as too political. They're seen as indoctrinating students instead of educating students. And that is really eroding public support. And it's one of the interesting things is there is a diminishment in the value that the public sees in a degree from our higher education, despite the fact that the premium for higher education has never been higher. So there's great value, real value over time in having a degree from a college or university. And yet the public perception is that it's actually down quite a bit. So two more quick ones in terms of the trends. One is, and some of you who have followed this for a while will remember all the talk about the tsunami of change that's coming to American higher education because of online learning, because of MOOCs, these massive online courses that would change everything about higher education. We've now gone through, in the last probably 20 years, two major moments where all of the predictions were the world has changed dramatically, higher education will change dramatically because of these massive online courses. There will no longer be in-person education. that has, in fact, not happened. Now, there have been changes. There's no doubt about that. There have been institutions that have risen up and really been able to think about online learning in a new way. Take Southern New Hampshire University, for example, which has made the most of this and has an extraordinary reach to students all around the country because of their online learning programs. There are places like Arizona State University that have decided to partner with places like Starbucks to be in the mode of educating people who work at Starbucks. There are places like Purdue that have bought Kaplan or online learning programs to really help to enhance what they're doing in their reach overall. So there are many different models on this. And some of the big programs that started, Coursera, for example, edX out of Harvard and MIT, Coursera out of Stanford, are still trying to find their way in terms of just what they're going to be when they grow up through all of this. But there's no doubt we're starting to see some changes in the way that those work for training, for micro credentials, less for deep education, in my experience, in all of this. And one of the things, and I'll come back to this again in a minute, that we really saw through COVID is that online learning just simply does not work for everybody. And the disparities are really striking when you see how these play out over time. So those are some of the trends that are happening. And one of the results of that is that it's really kind of shaking the foundation of many institutions, particularly those that have had some weaknesses before. They really are feeling it. To give you a sense, since 2016, 71 colleges have closed in the country. 71 colleges since 2016. Northern New England has certainly been affected by that. 5 have closed in Vermont. 9 have closed actually in Massachusetts, only 1 in Maine during that period. But we should expect to see many more. And so one of the reasons, let me just turn to COVID for a minute. One of the reasons we should expect to see many more is because the crisis that's created by the pandemic exposed and widened the fault lines in higher education and at individual institutions. Now that's true in lots of different industries. We're not distinct in that way, but we still haven't seen the full impact of this yet. So let me give you a few things that I'm seeing from what happened with COVID. In the same way that we had the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, there was a real kind of shakeout at that point in higher education. And what happened was then, and it's happening again now, is that there was a real flight to quality. So the strongest places came out of that stronger than ever. The places that were challenged became more challenged than ever. And that's true again right now. I'll come back to this as well, but it's really interesting to see how the strong places are in the best position that they've ever been. That's true for Colby. We had well over 15,000 applications for admissions this year. When I came in 2014, 15, we had 5,000 applications for admission. It is the highest quality student body we've ever seen during that time. We're really seeing that students are kind of flocking to the very best places. And this is true if you look across the Ivies, you look across the top private research universities and liberal arts colleges, many of them just had an exceptional year overall. And that kind of flight to quality, there's a few other reasons that I'll get into, but that's been pretty consistent when you look over time with the crises that happen. A second thing that happened with COVID, of course, is that a major online experiment took place. And it wasn't a booming success. Our students left in 2019 in March. It was just brutal to have everybody leave at that time. We went online and our faculty did an amazing job at being able to really shift to that because that's not our mode of teaching. We teach in person. It's highly personalized what we do. And suddenly we had to shift entirely and go online. Well, we knew after watching what that experiment brought for us that we needed to get people back on campus any way that we could, if we could do it safely for last year. And we were able to do that, and I'll come back to that. But one of the things that we saw that colleges and universities saw all over the country is 2 things. One is students lost motivation online. The very best students, those students who are deeply engaged in learning, lost motivation. And there was a huge disparity among students and their ability to be able to work online. it's one thing when you have your own room, you've got great Wi-Fi, you've got good equipment, you're able to really find a quiet space to do your work. But when we have students who are literally trying to sit behind couches because there's so much going on in their home at their time, when people are worried about their families who are out as first responders in the community and coming back with, they're worried about who's coming back with COVID, whether their parents will be able to survive this pandemic, whether they will be able to survive it. It's very hard to be focused on online learning at that time. And so we saw that COVID, of course, had a disparate impact on communities and on individuals and families. And that's showing in higher education in many different ways. And then we have this issue, and there, many of you will have children who dealt with this. But think about all the students in high school who lost a year or more of in-person learning and all the related social and emotional development that comes with that time. What's the impact going to be? And I have to say, I don't have an answer for that. You know, I'm looking forward to this year. I can't wait to get people back. But I do recognize, even though we had everybody back last year, and we will again this year, that we have a group of incoming first-year students, many of whom lost almost their entire senior year and a portion of their junior year in terms of their education. And what is that going to look like for them when they show up this year? You know, I think we all have to be prepared for that. And I think that COVID has affected people in ways that we still don't fully understand through all of this. Now, colleges and universities responded to COVID differently. And I have to say, I was completely wrong on this, because when I was asked about this, as we were coming through last summer, and we were all thinking about how we're going to open, I assumed that there would be a sort of a national consensus on what it looked like to open campuses, and that we would all ultimately open kind of at the same time in the same way that we all closed at the same time and in the same way in March of the previous year. So I started, you know, my assumption was we would sort of all come together and figure out how to do this. That's not what happened at all. There's a number of reasons for that, and I want to give you a few of them, and what I've seen, at least. So let me take you through different types of institutions. First, community colleges. Many of them almost collapsed. Very difficult community colleges. They saw by far the largest drop in enrollments of any sector of higher education in this past year. And that goes to the disparity of COVID and its effects overall, and who was impacted by this. Now, state universities went online and stayed there by and large, and they announced it early. They were not going to deal with COVID. They were not going to try to figure out how to keep a community safe. They just said, we can go online. In fact, for many of them, from a financial, from a reputational standpoint, from the educational standpoint, you know, I think they just decided, you know what, this is the most straightforward way for us to go forward. We're not going to get the support from our state to be able to put the safety protocols in place. We can go to online learning. These students will keep showing back up again one way or another. We'll be fine, and that's how we'll get through it. Now, struggling colleges, particularly struggling private colleges, they really fought to stay open by and large, but often without the requisite safety measures in place. And that created some disastrous situations. Some of them opened and some of them then closed not long after, because they hadn't done the work and made the investments. And frankly, many of them just didn't have the funding to do it, to be able to ensure that people could learn safely and be together on a campus. Now, to me, when I look across the sector that we're in, at the very sort of top end of higher education, you look at the top liberal arts colleges, top research universities in the country. If you take the top 5 wealthiest private universities, top 5 private wealthiest liberal arts colleges, none of them brought all of their students back last year, which is a striking trend to me, at least. Now, these are places that care deeply about the quality of their education. They have the most resources in the country to be able to keep people safe, and yet they decided not to do it at that time. And so why is that? And you know, I'm going to give you a couple of different answers to this, but I'm happy to have you challenge me on this, because I think there are many more to all of this. But let me give you an example from MIT. MIT didn't bring its undergraduates back by and large last year. So why wouldn't a place like MIT bring them back? Well, let me give you a financial answer first. So if you're MIT, you have a budget of about 2019, MIT's budget was roughly $4 billion at the time. $2 billion, half of the budget, came from funding for research, primarily federal funding for their research. So that's about $2 billion of their $4 billion budget. Another $1 billion comes from their endowment. They've got a large endowment. So that's about $3 billion of their, 3/4 of their money comes from either research funding or their endowment. Their undergraduate revenue, the revenue that comes net revenue of their from their undergraduate program is a little over 200 million. So say roughly 5% of their budget. 95% of their budget comes from something else, not from their undergraduate program. So what did they focus on when they reopened? They focused on reopening their laboratories first. That was the number one thing that they did. Get the faculty back into their laboratories, keep the research funding flowing. And then secondly, they focused on getting back their PhD students who work in the laboratories with the faculty and to be able to get those going at that time. Now, some of you might say, well, MIT's in an urban area. It would be a hard place to be able to have things back working. However, there were a number of places in Boston, Northeastern, Tufts, just outside of Boston, that brought all of their students back very successfully with really rigorous testing programs throughout all of that. Now, it's also true if you look at some of the top colleges, I think, you know, in a different way than state universities, they thought, hey, I'll use, you know, a place where I have a connection, but if you look at Harvard, did not bring all of their students back, did not put those kind of safety measures in place. But I think there's some point they say, where are the students going to go on all of this? They'll come back to Harvard. They might take a leave, but they'll come back. But the bigger issue for many of them is that their faculty were not interested in coming back and teaching in the classroom last year. I give a lot of credit to our faculty. We had 75% of our classes last year in person, 25% were online last year. Some of them were hybrid throughout that. But our faculty came back and they taught in person. And that's the highest number I've seen of any comparable institution through all of this. But it's much harder if you're at a university, it's much harder to replace a faculty member than it is to replace students. So where do you put your priorities? You put it on your research programs. Your reputation at a research university is driven by your faculty. You don't want to lose your faculty, and you think that your students are going to come back in the next year in any case, then it starts to help to define a set of parameters for you for how you're going to reopen. Now, for us, there's a very different calculation. What I'm concerned about is what is the experience of our students? What is the education that we're providing them every single day? And what does that look like? I mean, we have one reason for existing, and it's to provide our students with an outstanding education and all of the related experiences that will help them grow and develop and be successful in life. And we knew that we could do that best by actually having people together. So my focus from the very beginning was thinking about how do we do that? How do we get everybody back? What do we have to invest? So we put $10 million of investment into all types of risk mitigation strategies. Testing, we tested people 3 times a week throughout the year. We were really careful about how we did contact tracing. We rented a hotel so that when we needed people in quarantine or isolation, we had that space. We were really careful about the way that we set up every classroom around the campus. And by and large, we were able to have an incredibly successful year, given the craziness that we were all living through. Others could have done that as well. They made different choices about it. But for us, it wasn't about just protecting a research program. It was really protecting the undergraduate experience, the kind of education that our students were going to receive. And I have to say, and I'll come back to this at the end, but this to me, if I look at one of the things that's threatening American higher education right now, is there's actually not enough of that emphasis at this moment in time through all of this. So let me just close with a couple thoughts on what I think needs to be done at this time, given some of the challenges I just pointed out, given the pandemic that we are not through yet. Obviously, if we were, we'd all be together at this moment. But the first thing I'd say is, I think it's absolutely time for innovation and kind of renewed leadership in higher education. One of the things I worry a lot about is that the places that have long been the leaders of American higher education are no longer leading. The American model of higher education has long been follow the leader, see what the top places are doing, and follow them throughout all of this. But in my view, many of the top institutions are no longer leading in a way that provides a blueprint for the kind of innovation and success that colleges need. Too many are complacent, they're too defensive at the top, and innovation right now is going to come from all sectors. It's going to come from institutions we've never heard of. It's going to come from institutions like Southern New Hampshire University that are going online in very big ways. It's not just going to be from the Harvards and Yales of the world, which are not, in my view, providing the kind of leadership and innovation that we need right now through all of this. Second point I want to make is technology and online learning might be one answer, but it's certainly not the answer. We'll certainly see a lot more hybrid learning models that are coming on over time. You're going to see it a lot with professional programs, with some graduate programs. I have no doubt about that. You'll see it with other institutions as well as they're experimenting with this. And everybody's looking for lower cost platforms. And that's going to be one way through all of that. At the same time, COVID showed the power for in-person learning and what can really happen when you're actually in relationship with people while you're learning and challenging one another, and not in the transactional mode of what you get online. It's a very different type of learning, and that's not going away. It's also showed that, to me, and I'm biased about this, so you can push me on this, but the liberal arts is going to continue to be the most powerful and enduring model of education. But, and this is a big but, it needs to be connected to the world. And this is so critical. Now, we've worked very hard at this at Colby, and we have more to do. We created a program, for example, called Davis Connects. The Davis Connects programs facilitates research experiences, global experiences, and internship experiences for all of our students. And the idea is that when you come to Colby, you will have all of those experiences. There's funding for them. There's partnerships that we've set up with global institutions to be able to allow our students to be able to have these experiences and to be able to work them throughout their time at Colby. The idea is that every one of those experiences will make them a better student. They'll come back to the classroom asking different questions because of it. And they'll ultimately leave Colby with a very different type of resume and set of experiences and be more sure of themselves in the world in terms of what they want to do and how they can make an impact overall. We've also created something that we call the Colby Labs. And they're not labs in the sense of sort of scientific labs, but these labs are really about learning in partnership with other institutions, learning through experiences. So we have one right now, the Buck Lab that works on the environment and climate change. We have another one, the Lindy Packman Lab on biosciences innovation, where we create partnerships with places like Dana-Farber, with Memorial Sloan Kettering, for example, with Jackson Labs, that allows our students to be able to have access to the great laboratories of the world while they're still a student at Colby. Another point I want to make is that the curriculum needs to innovate and change over time. Now, we just added a brand new institute, thanks to the generosity of Andrew Davis and his family, for artificial intelligence. It's the first of its kind at a liberal arts college. And it's so important for our students, not only to be understanding the impact of artificial intelligence, but to really be using the applications in their work in an ongoing way, to be developing new applications, and to be able to critique and understand it in ways that they can help ensure that artificial intelligence is going to be for a greater good and not just be something that creates a whole new set of challenges for the world over time. There's such power in these tools. But if liberal arts students don't have the opportunity to use them and develop them, then we're really, I think, we're going to be in a difficult place as a society overall. But we have focused on a number of things, from public policy, climate change, bioinformatics and computational biology and genomics. We're creating a new inequality lab to think about inequalities across the world and what those look like over time. So, and we're focused on the arts. To me, the arts are so critical to being creative, thinking about new ways of understanding the world and understanding our humanity. Many of you know, if you haven't been to the Colby College Museum of Art, you should come on out to it. It's an extraordinary museum. got a couple of great exhibits going on right now. Bob Thompson exhibit, which is stunning, and also one on Mary Cassatt with her prints, which is amazing. But thinking about the arts, we're building a new performing arts center. We've been investing in the arts downtown. And then finally, we need to be connected to our local communities. And Betsy mentioned this at the beginning, but I just want to say that for too many of our colleges and universities, we've walled ourselves off from our communities instead of seeing ourselves as being regular and constant contributors to them in real partnership with our communities. We have $175 million in new investment going on in downtown Waterville. Waterville was a city that was sustained by the textile mills and the paper mills for generations, which are gone. And now we're really reinvesting in this city, and it's coming back in so many exciting ways. We're seeing the population increase. We're seeing businesses move into Waterville. We're seeing the property values rise after they didn't rise since the 1980s. It's been a real fundamental change in what that's like, but it's also been a real focused investment in improving the city over time. And Colby's been a major part of all of that. So I think in the end, and I'll close with this, I think that the institutions that are so clear about their mission and their values are going to be the ones that win out over time. For us, one of our mission and our values begins with the quality of our education, our focus on students. That's why we opened up last year. That's why we're back again this year in full, because that's what matters to us. And I never want to lose sight of that. And when I look around at American universities, too many, in my view, have lost sight of that piece. A second one is being a great employer. One of the striking things to me was watching the wealthiest colleges and universities start to lay off staff right away when the pandemic hit. Those places with tens of billions of dollars in endowment did that. We never did. We never laid off anybody. We kept everybody on the entire time. But those are so critical to being committed to the people who work at these institutions. So two other things, and I'll end. When I think about values, having just an enduring and unyielding commitment to freedom of inquiry and expression. We went through a major discussion around this at Colby for several years. We've got a really strong statement about our commitment to that. It is fundamental to learning, to being challenged, to understanding things in new ways, for having heretical ideas be able to kind of really push us and challenge us, to be able to discover and to learn and ultimately to have great progress on that. And finally, never losing sight of our mission. There are so many things that come at us right now, and institutions, they get criticized, rightly so, for being too political. We're not political organizations. They get criticized too much, I think, for thinking of themselves as social service agencies. We're not social service agencies. It's not that we don't have a social and public mission, but we're not social service agencies. We're educational institutions. We're research institutions. And every time we start to forget that and we move in different directions, we ultimately minimize our impact in the world, and we minimize the support that we have for this. So I'll stop there and love to hear any thoughts, questions about and challenges to any of this or anything else that might be going on in the world right now.
David, thank you very much. And you will not be disappointed. We have a stack of questions.
Oh, good.
I just want to thank you for your trenchant presentation of the trends in we'll call it your industry, the education sector. A fascinating set of observations and conclusions about where the various types of educational institutions are going. And then also the smorgasbord of programs and partnerships and exposures to new experiences that you've described for your Colby students. I'm sure we're going to want to dive into those as well. So I've offered Betsy Cohen the first shot at a question, and she has asked about community colleges. You focused in on them earlier in your comments. She says, will they survive? And if so, will they have to change?
I think they will. I think they will survive. Well, it looks like the federal government's going to basically make it free for all community colleges. So that certainly should help, not having to pay any tuition over time through all of this. But I actually worked at a community college for 2 years early in my career in Salinas, California, and it was fascinating. We were working with students who were primarily migrant workers and children of migrant workers in Salinas, and the community college had two kind of parallel missions. One was around preparing students for transfer to the University of California and the CSU system in California. And the second piece, which was a larger piece for our community college, was really around workforce training. How do you think about workforce training? How can you ensure that people are going to have the skill set that they need over time? And I really think that for community colleges to survive, they're going to have to really sharpen their focus. Those two can be fine, but too many community colleges have gotten a little bit too diffuse in what they're doing. And the workforce training needs are huge in this country. And so if that continues to happen, the community colleges can have a major impact. But if they can also continue to be that sort of first 2 years of gen ed program for many other state universities, and those transfer agreements are in place, then I think there's a strong chance that community colleges can be a great access route, as they had been previously, but have lost some of it, but a great access route for many children and their families to higher education.
Good, good. That's a hopeful observation. And we have a question from Jody Gill. Would you please expand on your comment that universities are political, teaching students what to think, not how to think?
Well, I think there's a few things. I'm not sure. I wouldn't say that they are political. I said that they're perceived to be political, although I think many of them are as well, in fairness. One of the reasons that they're perceived to be political is because if you look at we've got a great sociologist at Colby, Neil Gross, who did a study on this years ago, looking at and there have been several others that have come out since then, but look at the political leanings of faculty at institutions. And the political leanings are pretty far left overall across kind of American higher education on this. In fact, in recent studies I've seen, if you look at the students and the faculty, the faculty are often more liberal than the students themselves. And when the more that the political leanings creep into classroom teaching, creep into views about what's appropriate for study, what's appropriate for answers and research, the more damaging it is to institutions. One of the a formative time for me was being at the University of Chicago, where I was for 8 years before I came to Colby. And Chicago has long been a leader in ensuring that Chicago is a place with real freedom of thought, and it works. And one of the guiding principles for Chicago is a report that was written during the Vietnam War. It's called the Calvin Report. And the Calvin Report basically said that the institution as a whole should never take issues on political issues of the day, because those would ultimately seep down throughout the institution and be a signal to everybody about what's the right answer, what's the right things that you can study, what are the right types of themes that you can approach or not. And the institution has to have absolute neutrality on that, unless it's on political issues that have direct impact on the university itself. Say, for example, financial aid, research funding, things like that. And I've kept that same attitude at Colby since I've been here. I've been criticized by many people for doing that. But to me, I never want to be in a position where a junior faculty member, for example, thinks that they cannot be writing papers on issues that will somehow stand in opposition to an edict from the president or from the institution itself about what the right answer is, what the right approach is, what the right perspective is on a particular issue. And so to me, that institutional neutrality is one way to get there, but also this focus and constant training that you need to go through around issues of depoliticizing the classroom, about really understanding about how to listen to different perspectives. So it's something that we now train students in when they come into Colby throughout orientation, and try to keep that out front for folks from the very beginning. But I have to say, it is an ongoing challenge, and it's not going to be something that goes away easily.
David, I think that was a very, very interesting question, and you obviously gave it a good full answer. I'm going to interject a follow-up. How do you build that into the culture? How do you, as the leader of the institution, build that, the importance of institutional and teaching neutrality into the culture?
Well, one of the things that we started a few years back, which we didn't have at Colby, but other places had for some years, is a Center for Teaching and Learning. And it's been incredibly successful for us. And the Bach Center at Harvard is another example of this, but there are lots of them around universities. But our group that runs this provide a whole set of training for faculty throughout the year, where they really discuss these things in an ongoing way and help people to kind of understand the challenges of what it means to be able to teach into a diverse classroom. And when diverse means diversity of thought, as well as diversity of experiences and backgrounds and all of this. And that's been very helpful for us, but also thinking about when we went through the process of coming up with a document, our document around freedom of expression and inquiry, and keeping that document alive for people is really critical for us. So helping to acculturate people when they come in to say, this is a principal value, this is who we are as an institution, is so important in all of this. Now, we can do better at that than we've done so far, but we started last year with a major program for students when they came in. We're doing that again right now. We do it with faculty when they come in. So you have to keep it front and center through all of this work. And you just have to keep on it.
Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. Now we have a question from Bruce Claflin. He wants to know where you got the funding to provide the extensive COVID support, testing, the hotel for isolation, et cetera, that enabled you to bring students back on campus. And how did you get the faculty who are seen as being at higher risk by virtue of their age? How did you get them back to the classroom?
That was a great question. So first, the funding. On the funding side, we used our operating budget. We said, this is going to be something that we absolutely need to do. We're going to make this a priority for the year. So to put it in some context, we spent about $10 million on those risk mitigation strategies and testing. Our budget's around $225 million a year, to give it some context about what that looks like. It turned out that it was just the right thing to do. We had the highest enrollment in Colby's history last year. We ended up with more than a balanced budget at the end of the year, even after spending that $10 million. So it was a smart investment for us in every single way, directly to our mission, but even on the financial side, we ended up whole and then some because of it. In terms of the faculty piece of things, I'll say the first thing is our faculty is amazing, and they wanted to be back in the classroom. They know they didn't like teaching online, and they know they're at their best, and that their students are at their best when they're together. So many of them were just ready to come back. Many of them were concerned, of course, about what will this mean? What will it look like? Is this testing really going to work for us? We have to work with individual faculty, and our provost, Margaret McFadden, is incredible, but she spent an enormous amount of time talking to individual faculty who had concerns. And we said to them, if you feel uncomfortable, you do not have to come back. So there wasn't a hard and fast rule in any way. We encourage you to come back, but you do not have to come back. There's no punishment from it. There's no, you won't be held back in tenure or anything else if you don't do it. It's completely your choice through all this. And if you're at an age where you feel we saw how COVID affected people of different ages. If your age is something that gives you concern, if you have somebody at home that you're trying to protect, if your health is compromised in other ways, that's fine. But you could just feel uncomfortable about it. And they came back. Of course, people do have health reasons for not being back. And we said to them, of course not. We'll keep teach online. And we knew we would have some international students and others who would be online. But our faculty, by and large, really wanted to be back in the classroom, and they made the most of it. And I'm thrilled for them, and I'm so proud of what they did, because it's not what we saw at other institutions. They stepped up.
All right, thank you, David. Now we have two questions from someone who I happen to know is the mother of a Colby student.
Uh-oh.
Not surprisingly, one of her questions asks, do you think college tuitions can continue to rise as fast as they have in recent years?
That's a great question. So, I think there's going to be a real difference in pricing for institutions over the next 10 years. We're already seeing changes on there, and that many of the institutions that are struggling to enroll students are finding that they have to cut their pricing dramatically. But the challenge is when they cut their pricing dramatically, they still have very high expenses, and it's just not measuring up. And that's why we're seeing so many of the closures through all of this. To me, the most important question is really around affordability, more than it is around pricing. Pricing matters, but affordability matters more. We put two programs in place since I've been here. One is that for families $65,000 and under, that's half the country, you pay nothing to come to Colby, no family contribution whatsoever. For families with incomes of $150,000 and under, that's 85% of the country. You pay, you pay no more than $15,000 a year for your child to come to Colby. So cheaper than any state university to come to Colby if you're at the 85% of earnings in the country overall. And that's really helped to change our student body over time. And this, a couple months ago, Bloomberg Philanthropies did a study of colleges and giving Pell in their enrollment of Pell eligible students, so lower income families who are eligible for Pell grants, federal means tested grant. Colby was the #2 college in the country among all top colleges and universities in terms of the growth rate of Pell students coming to their campus. We've had a huge increase in that group over time. So we're really able now to be able to help middle income families in a very significant way. When the Chronicle of Higher Education last year looked at all of the financial aid programs across the country, and Colby was #4 in the nation in terms of being the most generous for the neediest students, right between Stanford and Harvard on that list, which they have significantly larger endowments than we do. So I'm glad we're putting our money in the right place and supporting our students. So we have focused on affordability on all of this. But I will say the expense side is going to continue to be expensive, particularly for the kind of education that Colby offers, because of the need to be able to have extraordinary faculty, great facilities, exceptional experiences throughout all of that. That is just not a low-cost endeavor.
All right, David, I'm going to press you on the Pell Grant topic. That's often the percentage of students on Pell Grants is an indicator of an institution's real commitment to trying to move the needle for those students who are coming from less enriched backgrounds and privileged backgrounds. Can you say what percentage of Colby students are Pell Grant recipients?
Yeah, when I came in, we were in single digits, about 9%, something like that. We're at about 18% now and climbing.
Good.
So very much going in the right direction.
Good progress. All right. Mother of Colby student Hillary also asked if you could speak a bit about the Gordon Center for the Arts project on campus and how it may tie into arts initiatives in downtown Waterville.
Oh my God, that's such a great setup. Thank you. So I'm sitting in my office at home and I'm looking across, I can look across out the window and I'm watching the construction site for the Gordon Center for Creative and Performing Arts. So we are building an absolutely beautiful performing arts center on campus that's going to have a huge lift for our programs in theater and dance and cinema studies and music, which is really important to us. But it's also going to be a center for innovation in all kinds of ways and creativity. So we're incredibly excited about that. I mentioned the museum earlier because we have what I think is the single best college art museum in the country. And it having now a facility and a set of programs in the performing arts that measure up to what we have in our museum is incredible. But we're also we're opening up 2 major art facilities in downtown Waterville as well. And these are all going to be connected. So the Schuff the Schuff Center for the Arts, which is under construction right now on Main Street in Waterville. We'll have in it a great independent, what's called the Railroad Square Cinema, an art house cinema theater. It connects to the Opera House, which is a great 800-seat theater in Waterville. It has performing and rehearsal space there. It will have a great Colby College Museum of Art gallery. It has community art spaces throughout there, and it will be the kind of living room for downtown Waterville. I can't wait till that's open. And secondly, we've opened up an arts collaborative building that has 2 floors of artist studios in it, where we'll have from students to professional artists working through a day and night. The Lunder Institute for American Art is in that building, and on the ground floor, it's all open for innovative art experiences with huge garage doors that open up onto Main Street and invite people in. So all of these programs together will be able to make Central Maine and Colby much more of a center for the arts than ever. And I think it's going to really change the nature of our community and really give a great new set of assets to the community, but also for the college itself, the students who are here, the way that people engage with one another, how they spend their time. I am incredibly excited about all of that.
Very exciting, David. Now we have, we're running short on time, and we have a couple more questions.
I'll be quick.
All right. This is from Haven Ladd. Given this period of accelerated change in higher education and the lack of a blueprint for the future coming from the elite R1 institutions, how should today's high school seniors think about choosing a college? It seems that the historic ratings and rankings are less relevant today.
Well, it's a great question. You know, the rankings are so all over the place because now there are a million rankings. Everybody has a ranking. The Wall Street Journal has a ranking. Forbes has a ranking. US News has a ranking. Newsweek came out with a ranking last week, and on and on and on. It's insane. We were number 8 in the Newsweek ranking, but I'm not looking at them, just to be clear. But I think the key is actually to look and to find out, like, what's important to you, you know, and what's your experience going to be like. You know, our focus on the experience of undergraduates, you know, I think a lot of institutions showed their true colors through COVID. When the going gets rough, people and institutions show what they're really all about. Look for places that care about your experience, that are going to provide you the resources to be able to do your best work and to grow and change over time. If students do that, they'll be fine. And they have to understand what the trade-offs are at different institutions. But if you find that, and you find a place that cares deeply about your education and where people are going to be committed to that in an unyielding way, everything will turn out just fine.
Yeah. All right, now brace yourself. The next question is from Ted Fisk. Do you recognize that name? Okay. Publisher of Fisk Guide to Colleges. He says, elite colleges do not have an impressive record in recent years in promoting socioeconomic diversity. Given your comments about challenges facing the traditional funding model for private colleges, what can be done about this?
Yeah, to me, Ted, things are changing pretty quickly on this. I think that's right. You know, we're part of a number of different groups that have been trying to do some analytical work across the top colleges and universities around these issues. One of the changes that happened this year for the first time was that near all top colleges and universities went test optional. That is changing the profile of the first year class of colleges in dramatic ways. I heard the other day, and I don't know if this is true, but I heard from somebody at Harvard that the first year incoming class at Harvard is 60% domestic US students of color, for example, far higher than they've ever had before, because they chose students differently this year than they've had in the past by not using standardized tests as one of the sort of fundamental measures for how they're looking at students. We went to test optional a few years ago. It made a big difference for us in how we read applications, how we think about students. And we've never had a more academically prepared and more diverse group of students than we have right now. So I think standardized testing is one of the answers. It's not the only one. But the broader issues, particularly for these institutions with extraordinary wealth, is about making the commitment on the financial aid side for affordability and being able to package those in a way that signal to families that these are places that really do care about you and where you can enroll. We named ours simply, we've got the Fair Shot Fund and we have the Colby Commitment. Those are our two big financial aid programs. Fair Shot Fund is the program for families 150,000 and under. Colby Commitment 65,000 and under. And I think the packaging matters because financial aid and its complexities are a real impediment to people enrolling in colleges. So those are two quick ideas, but I know, Gail, you've got to run, so I'll stop with those.
All right, I'm going to close with one last question here from Phoebe Cohen, Betsy's granddaughter. If you were building a college from scratch, what might it look like? And how different might it look from Colby or similar institutions today?
Well, Phoebe, that is a good question. That's a hard question. I think there's two things that, well, let me say that probably 3 or 4 things that I would really want to focus on. And I've mentioned them, but I just want to highlight them. I think, the commitment to the undergraduate education, it's a secondary thought for many institutions. And it can't be, even for our best research universities, there's got to be more of a focus on this and a commitment to it over time. So that would be very much at the top. Even if I had graduate programs, I would absolutely be assured that that's it. The issue that Ted raised, I think, is really important around access, about who is available for this, and really thinking about from the very beginning about how do you not only create access, but then how do you create an equitable and fair experience for all students when they come in from the very beginning. And we're all cloaked in our history and our culture. Colby's 210 years old. When you have 210 years of history, you have culture and everything that's built into it. And if you're starting from something fresh, you really get to create your own culture. And one of the things that I would do would be thinking about those issues of equity and access from the very beginning and everything that we do. And then I'd be very intentional about thinking about those experiences that enrich your education. I've been trying to add those in at Colby, from the kind of things that we're talking about right now, recently around the Davis Connects program. We think research experiences matter. Global experiences really matter. Internships matter, for example. All of those things make a difference, but I would be really intentional about those from the beginning. Those experiences outside the classroom that are going to make a difference for you in life, the kind of curriculum that's going to be relevant, equity and access from the very beginning. If you put all those together and you really can create that from scratch, you're going to have a really powerful institution.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on than a dream institution. And you're obviously doing your best to move Colby towards that. So hats off to you for your energy, your commitment, your passion, David. This has been a very revealing, informative, and wonderful session. As you can tell from the abundance of questions that we have, I have to apologize to a couple of people whose questions I wasn't able to fit in, but maybe we can get them to you separately and get some satisfaction for them. At this point, I thank you, and I need to turn to next week's program. You're very welcome to sign off if you wish to get home to your family, and I'll just describe what we're planning to do for August 22nd. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
All right, now the rest of you don't go away, please, because we have the final program of the summer series on August 22nd. We will present Chase Reynolds Ewald, author of 10 books focusing on art, design, food, and travel in the American West. We're going to be taking a closer look through her presentation on her most recent book entitled Bison. She tells the story of how the bison in the West have come back from near extinction and are contributing environmentally to the regeneration of their habitat in the West. So it's quite a change from mussels and oyster farming and kelp and other coastal topics that we have addressed in the past. Chase Reynolds Ewald will be at the community center. Let me repeat, she will be at the community center next Sunday in person. She has flown from the Bay Area where she lives to be our speaker and also to visit her parents, longtime Islesboro residents, Debbie and Russ Reynolds. Please join us in person, bring your masks, and or register for the program via Zoom at islesboroforum.org. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week and have a good rest of your evening.